In all of these top 10 videos I've been making, one thing that's been noticeably absent is my top 10 favorite board games. And I did set out to create such a video, but then I realized once I put together my top 10 that that didn't even encompass all of the games that I rate 9 out of 10 or higher. So I thought that maybe I should extend that to a top 20, and I put that one together, and still that barely scratched the surface of all the amazing games I wanted to talk about. So at that point I thought, okay, I'm going to extend this to a top 50 now, and I got that list done, and there were still just a couple of games that I really wanted to talk about, so I thought, okay, I'm going to stretch that just a bit further and make it a top 60, and I was finally happy with the list that I had. And so over the course of 6 videos, I'm going to talk about my top 60 board games, 10 games at a time. Now technically, I guess the full title of this series should be the top 60 games in my collection, because I'm only going to be talking about games I actually own. Periodically, I do play a game I really enjoy, but the 2 or 3 people who I game with on a regular basis do not particularly enjoy it. So it either doesn't stay in my collection or never gets there to begin with, because I realize I'm never actually going to get to play the game. And then other times I enjoy the game and I have it in my collection, and I've decided to hang on to it with the hopes that someday I'll actually have an opponent to play it with. So a game like that will likely make this list. As a result, I'm going to be talking about 2/3 of my game collection. My total number of games tends to hover around 90, in large part due to what I can actually fit on these 2 shelving units here, and partly because 90 games is more games than we'll ever have time to explore in the limited amount of time we actually have to play games these days. So what'll happen is, if I want to purchase some hot new games, typically what I'll have to do is pull some games out of my collection, auction them off to both raise the money and create the room for the new games that are coming in. And in that manner, I'm constantly culling my collection, and over time, just the best of the best for me stay on these shelves. And so what you'll find as we go through these top 60 is the rating for all of them is going to be at least 7 out of 10. So they really are my favorites. Now, to talk about a couple of the scales I'm going to be using, one thing I'll be doing is talking about my rating of each game on a 1 to 10 scale, and that is quite simply an indication of how much I enjoy the game. I don't really bring in any other complicating factors into that rating. It's how much do I love this game, 1 to 10. And then the other 1 to 10 I'm going to be talking about is an assessment of the complexity of the game. This is going to be an assessment not just of the sheer number of rules that need to be learned, but also about, during the actual gameplay, what is the size of the decision tree? How many layers of strategic or tactical depth does the game have? So it's not just the thickness of the rule book that I'm assessing with this complexity rating, but also, once you know how to play the game, how tough is it to learn how to play the game well. With this 10 scale, a 10 represents the most complex game and a 1 represents the least complex game. And since everybody has their own experiences and their own tolerance for very heavy games, I do need to provide a bit of a reference point. So I'll mention that games that get a 9 out of 10 on complexity for me include Clash of Cultures, Merchants and Marauders, and Fury of Dracula. And games that get the full 10 out of 10 on complexity would be Gloomhaven and War of the Ring. Of course, there are serious board game hobbyists out there who would consider games like this to be maybe a 4 or 5 out of 10, especially heavy war gamers who are really into the really complex, heavy stuff. But simply as a reference point, that's what you're looking at when I go over these particular ratings. And without further ado then, let's dive into my number 60 to 51 favorite games of all time. Squeaking onto this list at number 60 is the rather ostentatiously titled The Great Heartland Hulling Company. It is a game designed by Jason Kotarski, and it was published by Dice Hate Me Games. I own the Badlands expansion for this one, and I rate this game a 7 out of 10. My wife also really enjoys this little game too. So the number of players listed on the box is 2 to 4 players, and As far as the ideal number of players goes, I would agree that it scales well with 2 to 4. The box play time states 30 to 45 minutes, and that's pretty accurate. Relatively quick players could easily get a game in 30 minutes, I think, but yeah, the 45 minutes as an upper limit sounds reasonable. The overall complexity, I would put 3 out of 10. It's quite an easy little game to get into. And in a nutshell, this hauling game with heart does for the pick up and deliver genre what Nexus Ops does for the 4X games genre. It strips away any unnecessary elements and leaves a very impressive little game in the world's tiniest box here. A random board is created using cards, and players drive their trucks around picking up the available goods: pigs, cows, peas, and corn. Or, as my son called them when he couldn't pronounce his C's, pigs, pows, peas, and porn. And they bring them to locations that are looking to purchase those particular items in order to make money. Some of the money earned might be used for truck upgrades, but just like in real life, the goal is to get the most money the quickest, so most of that cash will be saved for that particular victory condition. It is simply a fun and very portable little pick up and deliver game. Number 59 is The Builder's Antiquity, which is basically version 2.0 of an earlier game called The Builder's Middle Ages. It was designed by Frédéric Henry and published by Asmodee. I give this game a rating 7 out of 10. My wife has enjoyed playing it with me as well. The box states the number of players at 2 to 4, and I agree that the ideal number of players is 2 to 4. It seems to scale all right. The box play time lists 30 minutes, which I think is a little underestimating it. I would say a realistic play time is more like 45 minutes. However, as a hot tip, you need to limit the total number of actions that can be taken in a turn to 5, I think, because the last turn of the game in particular will drag with seemingly endless actions if you don't have that limit. So the complexity is 3 out of 10, fairly low again. As long as you download my handy little player reference from the file section on BoardGameGeek.com that lets you keep track of everything that's happening in the game. So this is basically a simple and fun building game that competes in the same game space as Villages of Valyria, but is a bit lighter than that one. Players must acquire both paid and unpaid labor, equip them with the proper tools, and send them out to build buildings that give them money and victory points. And just like in real life, if you don't free your slaves before the end of the game, they score you negative points. Other than that, it's a race to acquire the most points by building these buildings. Number 58 is Prohi, designed by Mark Brunenkant and published by Blue Orange Games. I rate this game 7 out of 10. I'm not sure if my wife loved it. I think she thought it was okay. The box states the number of players is 3 to 6. I would say that 6 might be a bit much for this one. Probably it's ideal at 3 to 5, with 4 probably being the sweet spot, I would say. The box play time says 20 minutes. Realistically, probably closer to 30, but it's a pretty quick playing game, and the complexity is low. It's about a 3 out of 10 as well, as long as, once again, you have printed out my little flow chart of actions, because it can get a little confusing as to what happens in what circumstances once those inspections are taking place. This sneaky card game of trying to smuggle contraband loot under the noses of your fellow players while trying to catch them out doing the same is always good for a laugh. This game is what Sheriff of Nottingham should have been, is probably what I'd say if I'd ever played Sheriff of Nottingham. Players collect both legal goods and contraband and periodically attempt to send a convoy of goods to their warehouse. If an opposing player plays a police card against them, they can attempt a bribe to allow the convoy to carry on without an inspection, but an inspection will have different results depending on what is or is not found. Just like in real life, if the inspecting cop finds a cop in the convoy, the inspection immediately ends and the convoy is allowed to continue. It's a purely fun game of trying to get one over on your friends. Number 57 is Flick 'em Up. Ooh. A game that was designed by Jean-Yves Montportuis and Gaëtan Beaujameau, and it was published by Pretzel Games. I do own the Stallion Canyon expansion, but haven't bothered to pick up any of the others. So I rate it 7 out of 10. My wife enjoys it as well. The box states the game can be played by 2 to 10 players. I think 10 would be a little chaotic. I would say the ideal number is maybe 2 to 6, although it's a little bit awkward that the number of cowboys on each team is 5, so that's a little hard to divvy up, I guess, if you have fewer than 10 players, but it can be done without too much trouble, I suppose. The complexity is about 3 out of 10, which is about a point higher than it should be. I'd love to see this flicking game be just a little bit less rules intense. So Flick 'em Up, the game that teaches kids the importance of kerning, is so close to greatness. It turns Crokinole into a game of robbing the town hall and having shootouts in the Old West, and it does so with the most spectacular components, especially with my wood edition here. Just like in real life, a lot of laughs are had when booze, guns, and bank robbery are mixed together. However, what ought to be a really simple and purely fun flicking game ends up getting weighed down just a bit too much by too many rules. In a game like this, there shouldn't be a large flow chart of if this happens, then you need to do this and that and whatever else. I've been toying with a slightly simplified rules set just to make it a really fun flicky experience, but it is a good time nonetheless. Number 56 is First Train to Nuremberg. It was designed by Martin Wallace and published by Z-Man Games. It is a re-implementation of Last Train to Wensleydale, and it actually includes the board for that game and everything needed to play the earlier version of the game. I give it a rating of 7 out of 10. My wife has played it before, and I think she thinks it's okay, but if she was asked, I'm sure she would rather play Railroad Tycoon / Railways of the World. The box states the number of players is 2 to 4, and the ideal number of players is 2 to 4. It does scale well. I find that the Last Train to Wensleydale side of the board is good for 2 players because it is a tighter board. The box playtime gives an oddly wide spread of 45 minutes to 120 minutes, but I guess the reasoning must be 45 minutes for a 2-player game, 90 minutes for 3 players, and 2 hours for 4. I would say that realistically you're looking at 2 hours to play the game regardless of the player count, in my experience. The complexity is high. 7 out of 10 is what I give it. It's challenging to learn, which isn't helped by a downright terrible Martin Wallace rulebook. And it's also challenging to play well. It seems that every single time I've put together an auction to call some of my games over the past couple of years, I put First Train to Nuremberg on the pile of games only to inevitably pull it off again at the last second. The rules are atrocious, the setup process is ridiculously long and painful, the game kicks my butt every time I play it, and just like in real life, I struggle to just keep a positive income. Yeesh, that hits close to home. Yet something keeps me wanting to come back for more, and it's probably the fact that the game does challenge me. So for now it's on my shelf, but who knows for how long. Number 55.
I know how to count all the way to 55. And I will tell you how to do it faster than you can say poopty pints.
Is Steam Torpedo First Contact. It was designed by Ludovic Roudy and Bruno Sauté and published by Yellow Games. I own both the R&D and the To Your Positions expansions for the game. I give the game a rating of 7 out of 10. I haven't asked my wife to play it with me because it's really not her type of thing. And it's strictly a 2-player game. The box lists a playtime of 40 minutes, which I think is a little low. Realistically, I think you'd be looking at 45 minutes for kind of this basic game, or closer to an hour. If you're doing the full game, which includes drafting your tiles and custom building your submarines. The complexity is about a 4 out of 10. There are a lot of moving parts, particularly with the expansion added in, but none of it is terribly complicated, really. Steam Torpedo and Pro Heat are the reasons that this is a top 60 games instead of a top 50, because they're two games that I never seem to hear anybody talking about. They've apparently flown completely under the radar of the board game hobbyists, and I just really wanted to mention these two. I mean, look, Steam Torpedo is steampunk submarine combat. If there's one type of game I'll buy every single time, it's a simple yet highly tactical two-player game with asymmetrical sides. As you'll see in this top 60 countdown, that specific genre is totally my jam. Alas, the few regular gaming opponents that I have do not share this obsession, but I tend to hang on to these titles with the hope that one or both of my kids will eventually enjoy these games with me someday. Anyhow, in this game, you're building a custom submarine, then running around it with your crew members to activate various systems in an effort to outmaneuver and outgun your opponent. And just as in real life, if you're really sneaky, you can actually get one of your crew members to sneak off of your submarine onto your opponent's submarine and sabotage them. As an interesting note, though, the rulebook provides a recommended submarine layout for both subs for beginning players who don't want to dive straight into the building custom subs. But when I played this with a friend of mine using the recommended starting submarine setups, my friend discovered that one of the subs is actually unbeatable due to a very specific combination of actions that can be taken with a specific layout that it has. But thankfully this problem is unique to that one particular setup, and otherwise I find it to be a very fun tactical game. Number 54 is Lost Valley, the Yukon Gold Rush, 1896. It was designed by Roland, Johannes, and Tobias Gosler. Aw, a family project. And it was published by Pandasaurus Games. This is an excellent re-implementation of an old favorite of my wife and me that was just called Lost Valley, and was designed by Roland and Tobias Gosler. I guess no Johannes for the original, but whatever he brought to this re-implementation was great. And because this is the newer edition, I also have the Yukon mini expansion with it. I rate the game 7 out of 10, and my wife particularly loves this one. This has been one of her favorites for a long time. The number of players on the box is 2 to 6, but I'd be pretty hesitant to play it with more than 4. In fact, I'd want to only play it with 2 or 4 players. The 2-player game can be a very relaxed experience actually, where each player's explorer must stay on their side of the river until either the end of the river is found, or a bridge is built, or somebody buys a canoe. With 3 players, you would end up in a situation where 2 players would be competing with each other on one side of the river, while the other player is all off doing their own thing on the other side, which creates a bit of an imbalance with the game, which is why I would recommend either 2 or 4 players for this one. The box play time is 45 to 60 minutes, which is quite low. I would say it would be closer to 2 hours to get the full game in, especially if you're playing with 4 players. With 2 players, maybe an hour and a half, but definitely not 45 minutes. The complexity is about a 5 out of 10. It's kind of a mid-weight thing. The actual game turns are pretty quick and easy, but there are a lot of moving parts in this one due to the open world nature of the game. And in keeping with my player aid theme, I say you would really want to download my detailed player reference that I've created just to keep track of those many little things that are going on with this particular game. Now, there's really nothing quite like this open world game of adventure, exploration, and gold mining in the remote West. It allows players to be the directors of their own fate, and just like in real life, drinking whiskey allows their explorer to have an extra movement or an extra action. As I mentioned earlier, this game has been one of our favorites for many years. Number 53 is Flashpoint Fire Rescue. It was designed by Kevin Lansing and published by Indie Boards and Cards. The expansions and expansion elements that I own for this game include Second Story, Urban Structures, Extreme Danger, Veteran and Rescue Dog, Critically Wounded Victims, Explosive Objects, Hazmat POI, and Tragic Events, with design credits for those going to Kevin Lansing and other folks including Lutz Peitschker, Blue Newstifter, and Clint Heron. I rate the game 7 out of 10, and my wife and I have enjoyed fighting fires together, so she enjoys this one as well. The box states that the number of players for this game is 2 to 6, although I would say you're more ideal at 1 to 4. Although if you're playing with 2 players, I suggest keeping a shared firefighter character as a permanent deck gun operator so that you have at least firefighters in play in the game. The box playtime states 45 minutes. I would say that's really optimistic. I would probably double that realistically to about 1.5 hours. The complexity is about a 5 out of 10. The fire spreading rules can be especially cumbersome, and as always, I've made my little flowchart player reference that indicates what happens when various events are triggered. Flashpoint is an action point-based cooperative game along the lines of Pandemic, though it has more randomness than Pandemic due to the dice rolling. Just as in real life, you can come away a winner if you lose only a few people to horrible deaths in the fire. Actually, as a paramedic, I downright despise this part of the game and have attempted to come up with variants whereby losing even a single person results in a game loss. However, it's tricky to come up with something workable. Other than that, though, it is a challenging cooperative experience. Tried to avoid using fun as a descriptor for this one. Number 52 is V-Commandos, another cooperative game. This one designed by Thibaut de la Touraine. It was published by Triton Noir, and I own the expansions Resistance and Secret Weapons for this one. I give it a rating of 7.5 out of 10. My wife hasn't had a chance to play it yet, and even I've only explored a couple of the first learn-to-play scenarios so far. The box states the number of players at 1 to 4, which sounds about right, and it gives rather a wide spread in the play time of 30 to 120 minutes. I suppose that depends on what scenario you decide to play. Realistically, I guess I'd be closer to the 2-hour end of that time frame as I learn the game. And the complexity seems to be about middleweight at 5 out of 10. It could become lower as I learn the game systems and become more familiar with it, but we'll see how that goes. This is a really intriguing cooperative game set during the Second World War of trying to sneak into enemy installations and accomplish missions through stealth and sabotage rather than with your guns blazing. It's at an individual soldier scale, so just as in real life, killing is a little bit uncomfortably personal. As I mentioned, I've played through only the first couple of learning missions as a solo experience, but I do want to dive more into this game, especially since I'm reading right now the perfect companion book to it, which is a book called Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, The Mavericks Who Plotted Hitler's Defeat, by the author Giles Milton, or Giles Milton, I suppose, based on the last name Milton. This looks to be a very interesting cooperative puzzle that I am eager to get more experience with. And number 51 is Time's Up Title Recall, a game designed by Peter Serrett and Michael Adams and published by R&R Games. I give it a rating of 7.5 out of 10. My wife's rating from a few years back was 9.5 out of 10. She actually states that it's her favorite party game. On the box, the number of players is listed as 4+, but on the Board Game Geek page for this game, they list 4 to 18 players, which makes me wonder if they're required to put an upper limit on the website. I would say that the ideal number of players is 4 to 6, maybe up to 8. The playtime is listed on the Board Game Geek page as 1 hour. There's actually no playtime listed on the box here. And that's pretty realistic, I think. 1 hour for a game sounds about right, maybe slightly longer. The complexity is 1 out of 10, as long as you can mime charade style. And this really is Charades 2.0 with an interesting arc, since the game gets progressively harder and funnier as words and actions become more limited. Just like in real life, it's all better when people shut up. I don't even watch movies or TV shows or know much about pop culture, but I seem to manage okay with this title recall edition of Time's Up. This is one that's always good for laughs and always good fun if you have enough people to break up into a couple of teams and do a bit of acting. And just like that, we're already getting into the top 50. So stay tuned for that, and in the meantime, let me know in the comments below what games you've been enjoying lately. The preceding video has been brought to you free of charge by me, Josh. The only thing I ask in return is that you could do one of the following. Give me a thumb up, push the subscribe button, or share the link to this video with somebody who you think would enjoy it. Cheers. Now, there's periodically a game I really enjoy that could... However, often it'll be the case where... With my With this 10 scale, a 10 represents the Great Heartland Hauling Company. Hauling Company! I do own the Badlands expansion. Can't I get through a couple of sentences? Stupid hair. And the very last game, the very last turn can really be half, and that in an effort to outmaneuver and outgun your opponent. I just farted when I said that. I keep forgetting to hit the record button. So stay tuned for that as I plug away at when and in the meantime, just let me know.